When you're serving cake as one layer, it's nice to have this gently rounded top. But if you're planning to stack one layer on top of another, as for a wedding cake or a special celebration cake, you really need to have a level top, otherwise you have two sort of tottering layers. You can cut it off by eye, or because sometimes the side doesn't rise perfectly evenly, the best and most even way to cut it is by using the pan as a guide. So what I do is I determine where the part is that I want to start cutting, where it starts beginning to raise up and dome. And then I use cardboard rounds to raise the cake to that level. So there are about 2 or 3 cardboard rounds in the bottom of this 10-inch pan. This is a 9-inch cake. And it's really useful to have a serrated knife with a long blade. I couldn't do without this. This is one of my most important things in cake baking. And you can see I'm holding the top so that it doesn't, don't press down because otherwise it will squish down and you won't be getting it totally level. And you can see I'm just running it across the top. And then this is the part that people who are standing by or your kids get to eat. And I like to use these removable bottoms of the fluted tart pan because they're non-stick. Otherwise you can just spray a round, cardboard round, or coat it with, cover it with plastic wrap and coat it with non-stick spray. And you can see how beautifully this cuts it right off. And now I'm lifting this out. You can see it's on one of the cardboard rounds. And you can just leave it on the cardboard round if you want to level it. I mean, if you want to layer it and cut it into 2 even layers to frost the inside. You can do it by eye with the same serrated knife. So what I like to do is bend down to about eye level and make a cut. And this is where a turntable is also really indispensable. This will be my guide. So first I make the cut all the way around. And if you're using a contrasting frosting, say I was going to use a dark chocolate ganache against this banana cake, which would also be really delicious, I would like it to be pretty even because you'd see the contrast of the yellow cake, the golden cake, and the chocolate ganache. But otherwise it doesn't really matter if it's totally 100% equal height. And see, I'm going right through on that little track that I made, or I'm using the turntable, the squeaky turntable. But it's a heavy-duty one, and you can use one of those, the Rubbermaid plastic ones, and elevate it to make it more easy to use. But if you're doing a lot of cake baking, you really are going to be happy. See how I'm getting my hand out of the way of the serrated knife? You'll be really happy using the turntable. Now I can again use this bottom of the fluted tart pan to slip it to carry the 2 layers and separate them. But I want to show you a much more reliable way than eyeballing it to cut 2 even cake layers. And these wooden, well, dowels are round, so these are really wooden tracks. And they come in lumber yards in all different dimensions. These are 3/4 of an inch, and they come right halfway between the top and the bottom of the cake. So then you use your knife and use like these railroad tracks to go right across, so you don't have to guess and eyeball it. You just make it come right through. If you want, you can tape it down so that it doesn't wiggle back and forth. And banana cake is a nice firm cake, so it's really easy to cut like this. Oops, I went off track slightly. So you have to make sure that the knife rides the track. And then slip it underneath. And now the cake is ready. See where I went off track? I got a little higher. Now the cake is ready to frost the middle and then the top. And that's how you get even layers. Frosting a cake is really fun, and it's pretty quick and easy, especially when you have a beautiful, perfect layer like this. This is my new chocolate cake. And the reason that I'm so excited about it is because I use butter and oil. I've never done that in a cake before, and the results are exceptionally moist, especially for a chocolate cake. And you can see how beautifully even it is, just a slight dome, which makes it look more beautiful than if it were totally flat, and a beautiful sealed-in crust. But I'll show you what to do if you have a more ragged crust and how you deal with not getting crumbs in your frosting. I like to use the contrasting frosting. In this case, it's what I call neoclassic buttercream. I use Lyle's golden syrup that I beat into the egg yolks, and then, of course, butter. And you can see how creamy and golden it is. The Lyle's syrup gives it an extra butterscotchy flavor. So if it needs to be beaten lightly, you can always have a whisk to just whip it up, but right now it looks beautifully creamy. And I start by using a little bit of buttercream on the cardboard round. And the reason that I'm using the cardboard round is because in a 9-inch pan, a cake will bake and shrink slightly from the sides, so that there's exactly 1/4 of an inch between the sides of this cardboard round, which is 9 inches, and the cake. And that will determine how much frosting that you're going to use. So I'm going to slip it onto the round, and the buttercream will keep it from moving as I'm frosting. It's also nice when you serve it to have it stable on the cardboard. And then reposition it. At this time it's not stuck yet. And there are 2 ways of frosting a cake, really. One is using a turntable, and the other is doing it entirely by hand. I like using a turntable, and you'll see why, at least to do the top. Now, if I had a lot of crumbs on the side, what I would do, or on the top, is that I would spread what they call a crumb coating. It could either be melted jelly, or it could be a very thin layer of the buttercream. And it doesn't matter if crumbs get into that, because the next layer of the buttercream will cover it. I like to start with the top. And I always put on more than I need because it's easy to take off. But if you put on too little, that's when the crumbs come up and get into the frosting. So the first thing is to make sure that I'm sealing in the crust. Now, see how this is sliding slightly? I like to use either a piece of silicone or a damp cloth, and that will keep it more stable for this part of it. Okay, and now I'm using the turntable to get a really smooth top. Or you can go back and forth, but the main thing is I'm not lifting away the buttercream, because that could lift off the top of the crust.